Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today for this session on the new ITIL Force Specialist class and publication, Acquiring and Managing Cloud Services. I'm Lindsay, Director of Marketing here at Beyond 20, and I'm so glad you all were able to join us for this session today. It's going to be a good one. So before we get into the bulk of the presentation here, I want to tell you a little bit about Beyond 20 as a company, what we do, why we do it. So we're a transformation accelerator. We combine IT professional development and software development with expert consulting to help our clients attain their most ambitious evolutionary goals. Essentially, our mission is to change work life. It's why we get out of bed every morning. We do that through best practice training. We teach the full suite of ITIL classes, which I hope is at least partially why you're here today. We, of course, are, as you can see, a ServiceNow partner and a Sharewell partner. We're also the only elite Axelos consulting partner in the United States as of recording, all of which we're very proud of. And yeah, that's us. That's what we do. So moving on, before we get to our speakers, I want to tell you a little bit about where this course sits with respect to the overall training schema or scheme, depending on which country you're in. So you can see we're over on the left here under the ITIL extension modules. This, you'll notice, does not have ITIL Foundation listed beneath it as a prerequisite for the cloud class or the sustainability class. That's because it's not a prerequisite, technically. Though David and Kevin will tell you, I'm sure later, that we highly, highly recommend that you do take Foundation before you dive into these classes, because there's a lot of terminology that you will have learned in Foundation that's plugged into these, and without having that under your belt first, it's a lot to take in. So something to keep in mind as you're considering this class. Another thing I wanted to point out is that these classes are not part of either track as far as managing professional and strategic leader go. So these are aligned with all of the best practice that you'll find in those other classes. They dovetail really nicely with some of the concepts covered in other classes, but these are not part of that track. So something to keep in mind if you're shooting for ITIL Master, this is ancillary. So let's get into it. We're so lucky to have David Cannon with us today. He is the lead author and editor of this new publication. He's also EVP at Infinity 3, which I just realized rhymes. David, we are so grateful to have you. Thank you for your time. We're super excited to get into the weeds a little bit here with you. And with us in the weeds is Kevin Jones. He's a senior advisor at Beyond 20 and our resident cloud expert. So Kevin is teaching the class for us. He's done a lot of writing on the subject, and we're really excited to have his perspective here with us as well today. So with that, David, would you please take it away from me?
Thank you very much, Lindsay and Kevin, for having me as a guest on this. I've worked with Beyond 20 a fair bit back to the digital and IT strategy days when Erica and I and a couple of the Beyond 20 team were authoring the digital and IT strategy book. So really good to be back again, and now on this new venture around cloud. So we've structured this, this webinar more as a kind of discussion rather than as a canned presentation. And I thought it might be a good idea to kind of kick off the presentation with this diagram, which appears in both the DITS book as well as in the cloud book. And it talks about a very important dynamic when it comes to how you manage these environments. So I'll run through it quickly. And I know, Kevin, you had some very specific viewpoints on this, but very briefly, why this diagram is important is because it describes why organizations are changing the way in which they're changing today. So when you're in a very stable environment, and think back to the 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, we didn't think they were particularly stable back then, but comparatively they were. Technology that was introduced had a good lifespan. You would implement it, you would run it, you would manage the services, and they were fairly stable for several years. Today, we have an extremely high rate of innovation. And every time we innovate, we introduce something new to the market, which is exciting, which creates competitive advantage, which gives our customers a better experience, and they love us for it. But whenever you innovate, invariably the thing that you produce is not entirely stable for the first part of its life. And so a lot of effort is spent in getting that innovation to be more stable and teaching people how to operate it and make it more reliable. So very soon you have a number of people that understand how the innovation works, how to use it, and how to manage it. So we move into that operate stage. Well, after a period of time, and these days it's getting quicker and quicker, that number of people who know how to use and operate that innovation becomes pretty big. And the more people that do it, the more everybody starts doing it. So it very quickly goes from something that is unique to an organization to something that is a commodity that can be used by pretty much anybody. Now, in cloud, for example, think of servers. Back in the 80s, 90s, it was very, very important what kind of server you had, who the vendor of that server was, the operating system, what you could build on that operating system, how it performed, depending on what kind of application you were using, and so on. This is very important. Today, in the cloud, servers are virtual devices, 100% commoditized. We don't even know what hardware is being used to deliver those services. So it's become a commodity. And we just buy it from the cloud. We use it when and wherever we need it. And we can configure it and use it within seconds. That's how quick and easy it is now to use that. So very important thing to know about cloud is when you're using the cloud, you are using commoditized components. And this is something very often that gets lost in the hype around cloud. The cloud does not exist to provide customized services for unique solutions. It exists to provide a commoditized, standardized service to thousands of customers. And the way you consume those services is very different to the way you consume an innovative service. Now, I'll end with this, and then I want to hand over to Kevin. But the one point about cloud and innovation, people immediately say, yes, but there's a lot of innovation in the cloud. Absolutely. For example, you can get onto Google and you can use their AI labs in the cloud to model certain things. Fantastic. A lot of innovative technology in the use in the cloud. But that does not even account for 1% of the services that an organization like AWS, Microsoft, or Google provide. The 99-point-something% of services provided are highly standardized. They're defined once, provide to thousands of customers. And so to expect your cloud services to be highly customized, tailored to your specific and unique requirements is not a realistic expectation. Now, of course, I said there was just one more thing, but I'll end with this. The one thing about cloud is that it makes those commodities available wherever, whenever, and at speed, which in itself creates an advantage. So that's the purpose of this diagram, or at least one of the purposes of the diagram. And I know, Kevin, you had a look at this and had some thoughts about it too.
So to piggyback on what David was saying, as far as ways to innovate with the commoditization, a way that I like to look at this is using modern cloud is almost like playing a game of chess. The pieces are all standard. Everybody has access to the same pieces. The pieces all move about in the exact same way. It's the strategy behind it. It's the noggin work that goes in to figure out how can I use these existing conventional commoditized tools to win? How can I use this at my best advantage? So as David was saying, this is bringing about substantial changes in the way we're thinking about IT. It's no longer innovation at the actual bare metal technical level. It's much more innovative in the way we use these common commodities. And that's what's bringing us into these incredibly new and rich areas of development and deployment and things that we can do in the cloud that we could have never done in our conventional on-premises data centers. So that was the point that I want to say. It's giving us, with common tools, so many uncommon availabilities.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly important thing. And so we're starting to see really small organizations being able to compete against huge organizations because those capabilities are now affordable and easily available. So I like that point, Kevin, the fact that even though cloud is highly commoditized, it is fuel to help us be more innovative. And so we go through the whole cycle again. The next concept that we wanted to really talk about was this whole idea of digital strategy. And this is a really interesting one because digital strategy is really a business strategy. It says, how do we do business using some new type of technology? What are the opportunities that technology represents for us? Does it enable us to provide new products, open new markets, do something that we do today a lot more cost effectively and faster? So a digital strategy, it's a business strategy. And then we have the IT strategy. IT strategy traditionally has tended to focus more on sort of back office things like, what kind of architecture are we going to use? What kind of data center and where is it going to be located? How do we manage power and so on and so forth? But increasingly, the digital and the IT strategy are growing together because the components used to deliver value to the business in the front lines of the business, the digital components, are also partly IT. So those two strategies are going together. But what's really interesting about this is that the cloud strategy is really a subset of both of those. So, a lot of organizations will go to the cloud and say, well, we need a cloud strategy. And it's at the same level as the digital strategy. And so they're viewing it as if it's kind of like a business strategy. And in some cases, they will use the cloud for business purposes, but it's usually in support of a digital strategy. So the point of a cloud strategy is that it's a tactical strategy, if that makes any sense. It supports a higher level strategy. So very unlikely that the board of directors is going to worry about your cloud strategy, but they're definitely going to worry about business opportunities. How the cloud is used to deliver those business opportunities, there's varying levels of interest in that. So cloud strategies are very strategic to the people who use the cloud, but they're tactical to pretty much anybody else in the organization. Kevin, I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
I do have just a couple of small points. Since IT came about even in the 1940s, there's been that separation between business strategy and anything like a technical strategy, where business strategy led the day, and IT strategy or some kind of technical strategy was always completely and directly under command and control of larger business strategy. So you would see it definitely as a waterfall methodology for planning this stuff out. Since technology has brought us into the cloud, that is no longer as practicable as it used to be. And this diagram that David is showing us here, with the interconnection between digital and IT and cloud, itself may look innovative now, but in 5 years or maybe even 5 months, this is gonna look very quaint and very old-fashioned, and as if these ideas had to be pointed out, because business is digital and digital is business, and all of these things are going to be taken into account in the ways that we hit our customers. One other element I like to bring in is this is kind of the purpose for this whole publication. Is there's a lot of fabulous training out there for the technical part of the cloud, if you need to learn how to use Azure or AWS or any other cloud provider, there are vendors that can take you through excellent levels of training and get you to be very, very proficient in the way these work. But out there, there's really nobody talking about this particular slide. How do we as IT leaders, as business leaders, as thought leaders, how are we going to conceive of it not as yet another technology, but as another avenue to pursue our business? And that's a big part of why David wrote the book and why I'm here as well, is that this is not going to be aimed at a deeply technical audience. This is aimed at basically how do we devise our strategy as an enterprise to go forward, leveraging these new tools that are right now in the toolbox.
Yeah, so I wanted to, first I'll make a comment on me authoring the book, because when we started this whole journey, my first thought was, I don't know anything about the cloud. I'm not technically competent to be able to write this. I don't have a certification from one of the big cloud service providers. But as we started going down the road of scoping what needs to be in this book and learning more about the challenges that organizations were facing, I started to realize that the challenges with cloud are not technical challenges. They have to do with how you use the cloud and how you manage the cloud, which is exactly what you're talking about. And something came up. This is a question I have for you. Something came up as we were writing this book was, we come across a lot of organizations that have this cloud strategy, and they call it cloud first. And they're very proud of the strategy because it's an entire strategy in just 2 words. And I don't know if you've come across this and what your experience has been with that.
Yes, very much so. And it's 2 words that cover 1,000 miles of ground. Cloud first means something different to just about everybody that I've met who uses the terminology. Some people, if you have, cloud native organizations, new businesses that were born in the cloud, that means one thing, where basically everything other than the parking lot for the businesses is in the cloud. Other organizations are more traditional, and they are trying to move themselves into the cloud and trying to readjust all their strategies and all their tactics, and trying to make themselves cloud relevant. So yeah, you're absolutely right. That the cloud first is not I would not say that it's a well-defined term in the industry. It's determined on an individual basis with everyone who's trying to accomplish it. Some are much more successful than others, but just about everybody's trying.
Yeah, and I think one of the, a couple of things that we observed while we were going through this, one of which was, one of the authors said, cloud first is less a strategy and more of a design principle. And secondly, no, not everything belongs in the cloud. And we actually started seeing, and in the research, we started coming across organizations that were moving things back out of the cloud to on-premise because it shouldn't have been in the cloud in the first place. And these are things like, unique applications that require very specialized knowledge, and especially institutional knowledge within the organization to effectively use. And had found that the cloud just didn't have the kind of, APIs or the sources of data or the technical capability. They didn't have the technical capability to be able to manage that in the cloud, and we're starting to move them back again. So we found in some cases that the cloud first strategy had been too broadly applied. I think you're right. Yeah. I think it means different things to different people. So if you're going to use cloud first, that's fine, but you need to say what you mean by cloud first, and that becomes a heftier strategy document than just 2 words. So, yeah.
And that definitely rolls back to your point about commoditization. Is
yeah.
Again, some of these fine-tuned or very, very specific requirements don't really work in a highly commoditized environment, and they need to be brought back where you can have the true fine-grained control. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned something that as you were talking about, why we wrote the book, and you mentioned about this being something that was not freely available from the information that's published out there. And I think that's a really good point, because what we did was we looked at this not from the point of view of a service provider, but we looked at this whole subject from the point of view of the cloud consumer. So we didn't think about, well, I'm an IT department who's a service provider. How do I use cloud? We looked at it from the point of view, I'm an IT department. I'm a consumer of cloud services. How does that work? And we used this as our starting point, which was interesting. We didn't use cloud architectures. We didn't use cloud use cases as a basis for what we were doing. We started, this was the first thing that the first major decision made in writing this book was to base it on the customer journey, which comes out of the Drive Stakeholder Value book in ITIL 4. I know this is something that you've worked with in the past, Kevin. So I'm going to hand over to you to kind of introduce this and take us through it.
Sure. Thank you so much, David. Yeah, the cloud, the customer journey is a metaphor that that ITIL's been using in Drive Stakeholder Value, and I believe one other as well. But it's a way to understand and manage the experience that your customers are going to have when they engage with you. So I'm not gonna spend a great deal of time explaining it, but the gist of it is that initially your customers out there are going to be in a journey of exploration. They're going to decide, I need to be able to do X. I've realized that that X is something I lack, and X is something I must do. So I'm going to go look at someone who can sell me, build me, or run for me X. And they'll be on their own journey of exploration at that point. When they find potential vendors, sellers, partners, that's the engagement part, and that's where we find out, will this be the proper partner for me, the proper vendor? Do they meet my requirements? Do they meet the culture of my own organization? Is it going to be a good fit? And once you go from engage, you're ready to begin the finalization process. That's the offer, and that's where you're trading horses back and forth. That's where we're deciding how much will it cost, what are the requirements, what are the do I have any outside requirements or legislative or regulatory environments that I need to make sure are happening. So that'll all be part of the offer. And that's where we're deciding, will this be worth doing the handshake? When we get to agree, and agree is when we finally sign on the dotted line and say, yes, I will leverage this service. I will become a customer. I'll become a partner. This is where we shake hands on things. Now the work comes with onboarding, and this is where myself as a consumer does the heavy work of now bringing this new service, this new product, this new capability into my organization, so that I can integrate it with my own methodologies and processes, and make it a seamless product for me. Then we get to the co-creation, where working with customers, making sure that this will be the proper way to engage with my customers and verify that things are working on a proper basis. And finally, we get to realization, and that's where we get to those sweet, juicy, buttery, creamy, good outcomes that we're looking for. That's where the profits come in. That's where the happy customers are. That's what we're shooting for. So these steps are the customer journey. If we can understand that every customer, either us as a customer or us as a vendor, is going to go through this. And so if you notice below, you have the two long arrows that indicate the two roles, the customer and the service provider. Then you have the porpoising line that indicates the interaction between them. And sometimes some of these steps will be highly interactive. Others will be, we let the customer go and brood and think to themselves. And if you notice, there's that tiny little band of visibility, and that's where That's where the customer can see what's going on to the service provider, and the service provider can see what's going on to the customer. But if we can understand this journey ourselves as the customer, then we're ahead of the game, because now we know what to expect. Likewise, if we ourselves are the service provider, this lets us find more relevant customers to bring into our fold. So it's a back and forth, it's a two-way journey, and the more that we can understand it from both points of view, the stronger our interactions will be, and the more likely we are to have a successful outcome as either customer or service provider.
Right. And something interesting happened when we started applying this. And it started happening in two places. One was the actual orange strip at the top there, which is the things that happen in each of the stages. So we read the DSV book, and there was quite a bit of debate about this. In the DSV book, for example, you'll see that the first time that requirements, not the first time, but requirements definition is contained in the chapter around the offer. Well, if you're a customer, you're defining your requirements way before that. And so we applied this customer journey from a consumer point of view, not from a service provider point of view. And so what we found happening was some of the categories of activity or some of the activities in DSV moved, they changed position. And even more than that, if we're talking about requirements, for example, not only did they move from offer to even explore, but they appeared in all three stages. So in explore, you're defining your high level objectives. What are we trying to achieve here? In engage, you're learning more from the service provider about what they offer, and you're refining your requirements. In offer, you're communicating your final specifications to the service provider so you can get an RFP. And so we had to adjust and adapt the customer journey specifically to look at it from a consumer point of view. That was the first thing that happened. It was really interesting, and a lot of very interesting debates were had during that discussion. But the more interesting one to me was that, think about an IT department who's going through this. They're a service provider, and that's how they think of themselves. And if you read the DSV book, Drive Stakeholder Value book, it's aimed at the IT department as a service provider. Now, the service provider has visibility of pretty much everything they manage: the hardware, the applications, the networks, the data, storage, all of that. They have total visibility of all of that. When you move to the cloud, you become a customer. And now you don't have visibility of all of those devices. For storage, you have visibility of how much storage you're using. But you don't have the ability, well, in some cases you do, but very often you don't have the capability of defining what resides on which device, and so on and so forth. And so the line of visibility changes. And a lot of IT groups find that change very, very difficult, because I am now no longer able to make the kind of decisions and do the kind of things with the technology that I used to be able to do, because now that's in the hand of the cloud service provider. So part of this agree, onboard, co-create journey is this kind of redefinition of roles within the IT department. And it can be very stressful, and it can be confusing, and in many cases can result in failure of the project, because if you're not willing to relinquish responsibilities that you now want the cloud owner to manage, it becomes very, very difficult to actually achieve the value for both of you. So these were some interesting transitions, and we've talked about that in the book, about how that transition was made. And then the other thing that we had to recognize was that as you move through this orange cycle, It's not just you start at the beginning and you end at the end. That would be nice, but in many cases, you start at explore, you define something, you define your requirements, for example, you have a cloud strategy, and you go to engage and you suddenly realize that some of the assumptions you made were wrong. So you have to go back and revisit those. While you define your strategy, in some cases, you already know what the services are. So you can move straight past the engage and offer step and order them off the internet. So we know what the services are that we need. We know what they're going to do. We don't have to engage with the service provider. They've got an order button on their website. You just click it and off you go. So there are these feedback and feed forward loops happening all the way through this journey. Depending on what kind of cloud services you want to use and which kind of cloud service providers you're engaging with. So I don't know if you'd like to add something to that, Kevin.
No, you hit the part that this is very much of an iterative journey, and it always has been. It's never been a lockstep, step 1, step 2, step 3. But with the incredibly flexible nature of the cloud, you're getting so many more not just opportunities, but absolute requirements to go back and revisit your expectations and revisit your assumptions and realize that things that you were planning to do may not be technically feasible. So I've got to figure out a new way to do it. And then I figure this new way, do I need a new vendor? Things like that. So it's going to be in flux for the duration.
Srinath has asked a really interesting and I think important question as well. His question is the journey for this similar to the agile methodology? I'll have a go and I'm going to ask you to jump in as well, Kevin.
Sure.
So for me, it is an agile journey. Absolutely, you're right. Does it follow the agile methodology? Not necessarily. It can. If your team is a team that uses the agile methodology to manage services or to manage development or projects or any other unit of work for that matter, then they will apply the agile methodology to this journey. But it is designed so that you can use pretty much any methodology. But you're absolutely right. It has to be agile. You cannot say, well, in Explore, we define a strategy. And it doesn't matter what happens, when we reach the end of this journey, we will have achieved that strategy. You can't do that, right? Because there are so many things that happen along that journey, which may change your strategy. So you have to be agile. Kevin, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that.
Yeah, I would say agile with a lowercase a, not agile with a capital.
Yeah.
So yes, I mean, if you do it right, it is, to coin a phrase, it can be very agilicious. But yes, it's very much intended for maximum flexibility, and sometimes that's a benefit, and sometimes that's a burden. But you've got to be flexible as you're approaching this.
So, Srinath, if you want to expand your question further or challenge us even, please feel free to continue to do so in the Q&A or the chat, which I'm actually monitoring.
Yeah, I am as well.
There you go. We can do that. Now, Kevin, I know this next slide is one that was particularly relevant and
yes,
to you, and I know you had a lot more insights to it than I did, and I'm the one who even created this. So have at it.
When I read this slide, when I went through the materials and read this slide for the first time, I felt like I was kind of a smooth-brained IT guy, and as I dove into this slide, I could feel my brain wrinkling. This is the way. This is on a quadrant basis, on a 2-axis basis, a way to look at leveraging and implementing the cloud. So if you see there on the east-west, on the left to right, if you're an organization that favors centralized control versus an organization that's looking for less centralization, more autonomy, and then going north to south, you have standardized or commoditized solutions versus going south, very, very emergent, very innovative. And in each quadrant gives you more or less your cloud personality and the way that you as an organization will leverage the cloud according to your own larger strategies. I spent a lot of time with this slide thinking, wow, the way they were able to compress all these ideas into this simple box of boxes design. This really speaks to the power of good diagrams and good illustrations. But again, if you look there, if you're number one, that's the way most organizations kind of enter the cloud. Is you're looking for just standard solutions, standard ways of doing things. Like for a lot of organizations that we want storage. That's what we're looking for. I need a lot of storage, or maybe I want to use a particular cloud-based application. So so number one is the simplest. That's kind of cloud. It's cloud on training wheels, as opposed to if you look down at number 4. And these are the highly innovative organizations. This is like the Netflix and the Spotify and the Google kind of organizations that are pretty much inventing history as they go along. And then you have the other positions 1 and 2 or 2 and 3, which are basically waypoints between the two extremes. So it's a fabulous way to look at this, and especially as a business leader or an IT leader, and who's trying to come up with my own cloud strategy, have that framed around my larger business strategy with my cloud strategy internal to that. This is a great way to use this as a compass, so I can get a directional heading of where it is I want to take my organization based on what our strategic goals and objectives are. So I think this was like really one of the cornerstone diagrams of the entire publication, and what will be one of the cornerstone elements of the course.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I have to say, disclose a secret. This was the very last diagram that was put into the book. And for me, it represents how everything came together at the last minute in my mind. And I think you've actually explained it way better than I thought about it. Interesting for me is that in some organizations, all 4 of these things exist at the same time. And but the problem is the people using the cloud don't think of it like this. And so people managing the cloud think cloud is cloud. So there is one way that you manage cloud. And then it gets horribly confusing when suddenly somebody runs off and does something different. And I think this is very helpful, I think, as you said, for people to say, now, let's just think about how exactly are we using the cloud in this instance? Are we replacing something central that everybody's going to use? Are we giving a capability to a team that is going to go off and explore some new business avenue? Those are 2 very different uses of cloud and 2 very different governance models that have to be in place. And I think you really put your finger on it, on the difference between these. And as you were speaking, something else came to mind. In the DITS book, Digital and IT Strategy book, there is a diagram about levels of disruption. And we talk about companies who disrupt the entire ecosystem, right? It's like the Amazons, the Googles, the Ubers, the Airbnbs, right? They change the entire world and how it works. And then at the middle level are these organizations who change just their part of the world, right? It could be an industry, it could be an individual market segment. But for most of us, we're going to find there will be some element of number 4, which is the world-changing element. But for most of us, it's going to be somewhere in the 1, 2, or 3 range. And I think it's really important. If your culture does not support level 4, don't even try it. Start with level 1 or level 2, they're not levels, use case 1, use case 2, or even use case 3. And then as the culture of the organization adapts to the use of cloud, think about how it's going to go with 4. Otherwise, what you end up with is these just chaos of different parts of the organizations accelerating in different directions with no coordination between them. So, and this to me, just in addition, to what you said, Kevin, just raises the point. This is really this is not about a cloud technical discussion whatsoever. This is about business and IT executives sitting down and saying, this cloud thing, what is it going to do for us? How are we going to use it? And it is irrelevant what kind of architecture is being used or who's certified on which cloud. And the problem is very often we go to the cloud, we start using the services, and then suddenly we see these use cases emerging in the organization and we just don't know what to do with them. So rather have this discussion beforehand, know where you're going, understand that it could easily evolve from one approach to another, and manage it effectively.
Yeah,
so,
it's kind of a great way to prevent something like shadow IT from popping up. Although rather than shadow IT, this would probably be more like, in the cloud parlance, maybe more like patchy ground fog IT, because it's the ability to identify, here's who we are as an organization, here's the directions we need to take. So let's choose a compass heading and go that direction.
Right, exactly. You raised an interesting point. I was having a discussion with a friend of mine who's also a CIO, who was saying, the difference between shadow IT and legitimate use of IT in business units is not IT control. It's not whether the service came from IT or not, because of course you have business units that are going directly to cloud service providers, right? Salesforce, for example, or Workday, or one of these. They're not going through IT, but they're not shadow IT either. And it has to do with governance. And I'm not talking about control. I'm talking about how do we as an organization decide what is a legitimate use of technology, or in this case, the cloud. And it's a joint decision made by business units and IT units and everybody else in between. And if you're working with technology within what you've decided is legitimate use, whatever you do is not going to be shadow, even if it comes from a business unit. Whereas if what you do is go rogue and decide you're going to ignore all the accepted use standards, that's shadow IT. So very interesting. I think it's very important for readers of this to note, when we talk about shadow IT, we're not talking about the fact that business units can make decisions about how they use technology. What we're talking about is business units that specifically decide to use technology in a way that is not sanctioned or accepted by the rest of the organization. And it's not just about the IT department, it's about the corporate governance structures. So the interesting point there that you've raised, and I'm kind of thinking my way through that one as well. Following on from this, and we've kind of hinted at it right now, but this is an important concept in the book, and it kind of came out a little bit later, so it's not actually on the exam, but it's really important. And the point is, I'll give you a bit of backstory on this. We were writing, and we had a number of authors that were writing. I was the lead editor, so I got to see what everybody was writing. And I noticed that everybody that was writing from their point of view. And one of the big cloud service providers, I'm not going to mention any names here, let me just say that both AWS and Azure were involved in writing this book at different times and in different ways. But one of them said, what you're writing in this particular section here, you're not writing about a cloud service provider. And we said, but they are providing cloud services. And they said, no, they're not. And we had this huge debate about, what are you talking about? These are all cloud service providers. And they specifically said, no, The only one who is a cloud service provider is the one who actually provides, delivers the cloud services themselves. And I said to that particular group, but you also provide advisory services and consulting services and migration services. They say that may be part of our company, but it's not the cloud service providing part of the company. It is the professional services part of the company. They're different. The contract that you sign with them is different. So, and they were very animated about it, and with good reason, because it turns out that many of their customers were coming to them with demands for migration services and so on and so forth. And they had to keep saying, we don't do that. And they say, but you're company X, of course you do it. And they say, no, if you want to do that, you have to deal with this part of company X, and it's a completely separate part. So who you're dealing with and knowing what the limitations of the services they provide is really important when you're dealing with cloud services. And so what we did is we created this list, and this table doesn't even exist in the book. We created this table. I mean, I think this is something we put together for this presentation, which pretty much shows the different types of organization that are involved. These are not cloud service providers, although sometimes we think they are. They're not. They're actually partner organizations that work together with the cloud service provider, which could be, somebody like Amazon or Google or Azure, but also somebody like ServiceNow, who is a software as a service provider. ServiceNow leverages their partner network extensively when it comes to implementation services. So, it's very important to know who you're dealing with when you're asking for a particular type of service. And one other helpful thing that came from one of the cloud service providers, it was AWS, said, if you're ever confused about whether you're dealing with a cloud service provider or a partner, ask this question. And that is, are you ordering labor or are you ordering services? If you're ordering labor, in other words, consultancy, advisory, implementation services, migration services, you're not dealing with a cloud service provider, you're dealing with a partner. So anything that involves labor is a partner. The rest, if it's a service, that comes through us. If it's the actual facility, feature, or function that you're using, that's the cloud service. Which was helpful, and it can avoid a lot of unnecessary anguish when you think you're not getting what you're paying for, but they don't actually provide that service. So that's the purpose of this chart. If you want to kind of jump in there, Kevin. Sorry,
yeah, I don't want to take up too much time because we are kind of running to the end. But for example, ServiceNow partners like Beyond 20, we would certainly be represented proudly in that third column under consulting and advisory. As David mentioned, ServiceNow leverages its partner community widely, and so that's where you may speak to me or one of my colleagues.
Right, exactly. As you pointed out, we have 12 minutes left. So here's just an example, and we don't have to spend too much time on this, but this specifically looks at the services provided by migration and implementation partners. These are services that are offered by professional services organizations and not the cloud service provider necessarily. Now, they will give you a lot of best practices for how to do these. They document these and they put them out there, and there are training courses which help you to understand how to plan and design within a particular cloud service provider environment. But the planning and design itself, that activity, is done by the partner. Should I just move on?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Which raises this very important point, which is the shared responsibility model. Who is responsible for what? Every cloud service provider has a version of this diagram, depending on what kind of services they offer. But it tells you, this one is a very high level one, it tells you what things will be owned by the cloud service provider and what things will be owned by the consumer, depending on which model you're using. Interestingly, you'll see that some of those squares are divided into two, which means that the customer does one and the cloud service provider does the same thing, but different activities in that thing. Good example of this, I mean, they've given some there, but a good example of this to people on this call will be service management processes, change management, problem management, incident management. When you move to the cloud, a large part of those processes is now performed by the cloud service provider. And it's on the other side of the line of visibility. You don't get to see what they do with it. And very important to know which activities you're relinquishing so that you don't try and duplicate them or do them for the cloud service provider when it's their responsibility, and vice versa. Kevin, if you want to comment on that.
No, as I say, this was for me, the real point of interest is everywhere there's not a rectangle, but a triangle. And
right.
trying to stake out who has the responsibility, who's in charge in those unusual shared spaces. And those are the elements you just have to hammer out as part of our customer journey when we were talking earlier about offer and agree. Right. Sometimes the contracts are solid and that's just what happens. Other times we may be able to negotiate, but this is where, otherwise, this is one of the things that makes cloud so unusual, is this very, very delineated sense of who owns what.
Right. Now, the next one is also one of those diagrams that made it into the text towards the end of the cycle, and it's it looks very confusing, but it's actually not. It's called the value co-creation map, and it's all about how to map the things that are important to you as a business to the activities that are happening in the cloud. And just an interesting point, the original name of this was the Cloud Service Theater of Value Co-Creation. That was its name. Theater in the sense of, I think, Kevin, you called it a space, right? An area within which we operate. Of course, when we first saw that, we thought theater and we thought of, movies and plays
Hamlet,
and that kind
Macbeth.
of thing. Exactly. So, but we felt that was not appropriate because there were too many things in there. So we called it the Carnival of Co-Creation because there were so many sideshows in there. But be that as it may, this is an incredibly helpful tool. I don't know, Kevin, if you want to introduce it or if you'd like me to.
Yeah.
Kind of.
For me, this is the other big brain wrinkler. This and that quadrant design. Because in the center we have what I've taken to call the lotus blossom, or in this case, maybe even that pile of ginger on your sushi plate, that gives us the core key elements of providing and consuming cloud. And then just like the diagram of an atom, where we have protons and neutrons in the center, and then we have electrons spinning in their orbits around the outside. So with the blue ovals, we have the other points of concern, the things that we're trying to achieve that allow us to be successful, and then around the next layer gives us almost like an east-west hemisphere view of relationships. What's part of relationship management versus what's part of continual improvement. And all of these things fit together so that we get the chance to actually realize the value of our investment in the cloud. And that's what gets us to the outcomes that we're all desiring to hit as practitioners and as consumers. And then notice we have a thing that I call the placemat. Everything is placed in the VUCA environment, in volatility, ambiguity, uncertainty, and complexity. And that makes up basically the stuff of deep space that all this stuff is arrayed onto.
Right. And I think also to note, this is not just a great concept, it's actually a tool, because if you understand that what you're looking to achieve in your organization by moving to the cloud is operational excellence, what we did in the book is we listed all of the ITIL practices that would contribute to operational excellence. And we gave examples of how you could split the activities between the consumer and the cloud service provider. So there's actually a pretty tangible body of work that sits underneath this. And, of course, it can never be complete because there are so many capabilities that are outside of ITIL that your organization will find important, but it gives a really good way of mapping how to do what's valuable to you, how to achieve what's valuable to you when you move to the cloud. So now that's kind of the end of the formal presentation. Just I think over to you, Kevin, just to talk about the course, or was that Lindsay? I can't remember.
I think it's for me, I think.
Right.
So the publication that David wrote and that ITIL is putting out or Axelos is putting out is ITIL for Acquiring and Managing Cloud Services. And again, as we spoke, that's definitely from a strategic point of view. It's a 3-day class, and the folks that we're looking, the target market for this will be IT executives, IT decision makers, business executives, business decision makers. So the people that will be involved in discussing strategy and tactics. Again, a 3-day class. If you remember from our certification schema earlier, it's separate. It's not part of managing professional or strategic leader, and therefore it does not have foundations as a requirement. I wouldn't call it a requirement, but I would call it a very, very heavy-handed suggestion to sit through a foundations class, because we're going to be using so much of the terms and terminology that will just be the entire ACMS class will be marinating in foundations technology. So you'll want to be able to have that at hand, not just from the review session we do early in day one, but to have it integrated. It'll be a 40-question exam in classic Axelos PeopleSearch style, 90 minutes to complete. So 40-question closed book, 90 minutes to complete. I've got to say, I'm still looking for the pass number. This stuff is so new, it's still in the wrapper. And I've been pinging people. I haven't gotten anyone back to me. The pass rate, I'm thinking, will be either a 65% or a 70% for a passing score. Please don't hold me to that, but that's my supposition. But otherwise, it will follow the standard the standard ITIL type exam, 40 questions. Although this will be 90 minutes, and you'll do the same remote exam through PeopleSearch.
Dustin asks whether this is a mandatory class. I can answer that. No, it is not mandatory. Yeah. It is not part of managing professional. It is not part of strategic leader. It is a standalone certification. But again, I think if you're in the arena of cloud management, I think it is an extremely helpful resource.
And again, the kind of people who may be leading your cloud activities, who would be the kind of people who would be earning certifications from AWS or Azure or other cloud providers, they would also be excellent candidates for this one to see cloud management from the other side of the fence.
Yeah, and I would also point out AWS themselves actually posted a blog on their website in which they recommended that their customers actually do this course, at least read the book.
We're about at the hour, so it's time to wrap, but I wanted to mention, we've put together a really fun class around this topic. Kevin, of course, is one of our instructors. All of our training is still live virtual. We're not doing any in-person training just yet. And we've worked really hard the last year and a half to put together compelling, really interactive virtual training that ensures that all of our students soak up the concepts just as well from their house as they would in the classroom. So join us for a class in 2022. If you have any additional questions about the training or about the publication, please reach out to us. We're happy to help. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time today.